Sexual violence against women in India. What's behind so many cases of rape in the country? Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. The rape and murder of a trainee doctor in the Indian city of Kolkata last month sparked nationwide protests and reignited public outrage over sexual violence against women. According to India's latest available statistics, a rape is committed there every 16 minutes. Ravinder Bauer examines why this happens so often in India.
Rallies, demonstrations over the rape and murder of a doctor in the eastern state of West Bengal continue to rock India. Protesters are demanding justice for the victim and the right to safer workplaces. The outcry has once again highlighted the threats women face in India.
Because just if we look at this case, I think it's representative of many other cases where there are structural barricades. In the issue of providing a secure environment for women who are out of their homes. Domestic violence is very much an issue, but now we're talking about violence outside the home. So what are the barriers there? Secondly, the access to justice. And thirdly, the certainty of punishment for a crime.
According to official government data, 86 cases of rape were registered every day in India in 2022. Even though strict laws to protect women against sexual violence are in place, they don't appear to be a deterrent.
Because of the way in which we view crimes against women and particularly sexual harassment and assault against women. So it's not given the kind of priority that it should be given.
And the impact of sex crimes is far-reaching.
We know that rape is about power. It's about exercising power. So it's also about exercising power over not just women, but women as symbols of their community. And you see again over there the idea that women are not just symbols, but objects of property.
In a nation where 151 elected representatives in state and central government have declared cases related to crimes against women in their election affidavits, the road to an equal and just future is long. Ravinder Bauer, CGTN, Delhi.
It's time to bring in our guests. From New Delhi, Shruti Kapoor is the founder of the Sayfty Trust, a gender equality activist as well. Also from New Delhi, Tushar Gupta is a political analyst, and Noopur Tiwari is a journalist and founder of the platform Smashboard. She joins us from Paris. Welcome to all of you to the show. Shruti, let me start with you. You founded the Sayfty Trust after that notorious gang rape in New Delhi in 2012, and Sayfty's goal, as you point out, is to educate and empower women and girls in India to protect themselves from the kind of violence that we have been seeing. Now, that crime that I'm talking about took place 12 years ago in Delhi, and here we are discussing another horrific rape that's taken place in the country. What is your assessment of what is happening in India right now with this particular type of crime, and what still needs to be done?
Anand, I'm back with you on this show discussing yet another sexual assault and rape case 12 years after we started Sayfty Trust. Just goes on to show how deep-rooted this problem is in this country. And over the years, while we have seen progress in terms of legal reforms, institutional reforms, judicial reforms being meted against crimes against women in India, the unfortunate reality is that women and girls still feel unsafe, are still facing these horrendous crimes because we are not really addressing the root causes of why these crimes are being committed. with the judicial reforms that were introduced right after the Nirbhaya rape case, like the POSH Act or the Nirbhaya Act, there are huge gaps in implementation. There are huge gaps that exist in providing justice to victims. A Nirbhaya fund was set up for, which is almost about $760 million now. 12 years later, only less than 50% of that fund has been used towards policies, towards making roads safer, implementing CCTVs. So I feel there are problems at many levels. Political lack of political will is definitely one, which doesn't take women's safety as a core serious issue in our country. Then of course we are not addressing the mindsets of men and boys who still are viewing women and girls as second-class citizens. There's no concept of consent in our country. We don't have sex education. So we are really not tackling this core issue and not addressing the root problems. So what we end up doing when such cases happen is, providing quick fix solutions. Oh, let's put CCTVs in public places, or let's hang the rapist. But these don't really address the root causes of why rapes are being committed. And that's why, 12 years later, we still find ourselves in the same position, discussing the same issues that we have been for almost a decade.
Right, and Shruti, you raise an important point there when you say that there are laws on the statute books. In fact, there were those amendments and new legislation that was introduced after that attack in 2012. But there is a failure to implement this, a failure to enforce this.
Absolutely.
Why is that?
There's a failure to implement because, again, our judicial system is really broken. We have introduced fast-track courts, but it still takes, there are about 160,000 pending cases of crimes against women. So it takes months and years for a rape case to even get a hearing. Then, of course, there are other problems like evidence collection. We have seen in this particular case tampering of evidence. At the very first step, when a victim tries to even go and file an FIR, a first information report at the police station, oftentimes the police deters the victim or the family from filing an FIR. Sometimes they don't want to file an official report because they want to keep their crime numbers below a certain level. Once you file a report, your crime numbers will be officially included, and so there's underreporting. Now, at that very stage, you are delaying the process of justice because you have not even filed an FIR. 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 days later, once you file the FIR, by then the evidence might have been tampered. The evidence might have been, for example, in this case, we've seen it's completely tampered, and that will delay the whole process of justice. But we don't have
Right.
enough judges to take over these cases. The conviction rates are so low. In rape cases, only 1 in 4 cases are reaching the courts for a trial. So where is the justice for the victim? Where is the hope for anybody who has faced any sexual assault or abuse to see that they can get timely justice, in a way which is quick and efficient?
Right, that's what one of our guests in our introductory report pointed out, that there is a big challenge with access to justice. Noopur Tiwari, great to have you with us. Now, I mentioned those figures in the introduction. According to official figures, India sees a rape every 16 minutes. And there was a piece in the New York Times, and the Times said that India, by many measures, remains one of the world's most unsafe places for women. That is a pretty serious indictment, and it points in a large part to major shortcomings, if not outright failure on the part of the federal government as well as state and local law enforcement agencies to keep people safe, especially women. This is one of the major functions of government. How do you see it?
I think the question I'm hearing here is, why are women unsafe in India?
Yeah.
So I want to start by saying that women are unsafe in India for pretty much the same reasons that women are unsafe in the rest of the world. So before I come to specifically India, or particularly this case that we're discussing, I want to say that this question, and a lot of times New York Times tends to write articles in this tone and tenor, this question implies that India is somehow, or Indians are somehow inherently misogynist. So you were mentioning statistics. So let's say where you are in the US or where I am in France. Let's talk about that. So I'm not a big fan of statistics, I'd like to say, because in this context, reporting is low everywhere in the world, including in India. But where you are right now, in the US, every 68 seconds, one person is sexually assaulted. And where I am in France, every 2.5 minutes, there is one rape or an attempted rape. So rape culture, I want to say firstly, is all pervasive. So it's woven into the fabric of our global culture. And that's why women are unsafe everywhere, including in India. So I'd really like to sort of set the frame right here, because very often on mainstream television, and especially when we are making a sort of assumption that India is somehow much worse. So the scenario, of course, is bad in India, but it isn't as if it's great elsewhere. So I really want to underline that. And if we want to discuss a problem as we're doing here, or if we want to fix it, I think we have to really name the problem fully. And here's what I think it is. So capitalism and historical and contemporary forms of colonialism exacerbate sexual violence. And these structures systemically oppress the global majority, making it more challenging to dismantle rape culture. So rape culture exists everywhere, but it's all the more challenging. In addition to that, I feel that in India we have widespread casteism, which in its contemporary form gets kind of, I'd say, supersized in combination with capitalism, and then marginalized groups bear the brunt of this violence. So we can't divorce the problem of sexual violence from these larger structures, so I want to name that. We spend a lot of time discussing the state's role and the criminal justice system. So if we look at all of this within the, through the lens of capitalism, what we have to see is that, criminal justice really doles out justice to victims of rape nowhere, including in the United States, including in France where I am, including in India. The criminal justice system basically is very, I'd say, disproportionately concerned with punishing the perpetrator. So victims actually are not really getting any restorative justice. The aim is really to punish, to take revenge, and which is why in India, where the protests are happening, a lot of people are asking for death penalty, which is another very grave concern, because here we are actually, again, in the very capitalistic style of looking at justice, we are actually looking at taking revenge. So the state comes in and takes revenge. It is completely fixated with the perpetrator, and with, avenging what has happened.
Right.
So these really, I think this context is very important for this discussion.
Right, and I get your point that, rape is a crime that is committed throughout the world. It's not just in India but in this particular instance, we are focusing on India. Tushar Gupta, talking about the criminal justice system in India, what can you tell us about the role the criminal justice system plays in countering violence against women? I mean, we talked about the 2012 rape in Delhi, and shortly afterwards, India did introduce new laws, amendments to existing laws as well, which focused on a number of issues. It focused on rape, on acid violence, on sexual harassment, on stalking, on trafficking as well. What kind of impact did that have in India on what we are seeing right now?
Good evening. Women violence and acting against women violence, preparing against it, will always be a work in progress in India and elsewhere in the world. You really don't want to get into numbers because that takes away from the sensitivity of the debate, even if it bears core facts forward. But if you talk about the criminal justice system in India, see, there's sort of layers to it. Now, I'll give you the example of the Kolkata case. First thing we need to understand that in India, state controls the law and order. So it's the state government, not the center government. It's the state government. So the condition of how this is dealt with also varies from state to state. I'm not saying from government to government, but from state to state. In Uttar Pradesh, for instance, one of the highest population states in India, probably if it was a separate country, it would be as big as the 10th most populated country in the world. The speed of punishment today acts as a deterrent, to give you one example. However, in contrast, in West Bengal, where this case happened, that deterrent is still not there. So in Kolkata, where this entire crime happened, it was happening inside a hospital. It was supposedly a safe space for a woman who was training to be a doctor. But the problem, Anand, also is that the political filters that are applied to these investigations, they are also one of the root of the problem. I'll give an example. The person who's being charged with this entire crime, he's a civic volunteer with the local government. Now, in 2021 also, there was a post-poll violence episode in May 2021 after the state elections had been concluded and the results had come out. And there were several instances of violence against women when a National Human Rights Commission report stated about how violence against women was, entirely done and what was the role of the civic volunteers. Unfortunately, that report, which contained a lot of details of violence against women at that particular time, was discarded by the state governments. No one wanted to look at that report to prepare from it even. And today, 3 years later, we are standing at the same juncture. To give you one example. And this is the problem. When you put on political filters to address this problem, be it from a judicial perspective, be it from a lawmaking perspective, be it from a policy perspective, that is where you sort of aggravate the entire problem. If you ask me what can really be done for the future, there are only two solutions, Anand, just two. One, punishment has to act as a deterrent. I humbly disagree with the fellow panelist who says capital punishment is sort of revenge by the state. I don't think we need to see it like that. Every culture or civilization has its realities.
Right.
I personally I'm not opposed to the idea of capital punishment. And number two, since we are also on the subject of capitalism, I don't see empowered women or women who are following the model of economic capitalism as somehow a problem because that is causing this violence.
Right.
I mean, the women who was murdered in Kolkata was a doctor. She was training to be a doctor. So that's pretty much within the capitalist model. So, we need to address these complicated realities, but the entire problem needs to be solved at the ground level. It's very good for you and I to discuss this, or for the center to discuss this. That's the central government.
Yeah.
But unless the situation at the ground doesn't improve, economic empowerment and deterrent, nothing will really change.
Okay, I want to get to that point about economic empowerment of women in a moment. But Shruti, I'm going to get back to something you were talking about earlier on. And this is, I guess, a cultural or social perception of women where they're seen, as you pointed out, as second-class citizens. In fact, there was a 2022 survey done by the Pew Research Company, which showed that 9 in 10 Indians agree with the notion that a wife must always be obeyed, must always obey her husband, rather. And I'm wondering, to what extent is that a sign that women must have a perceived value, a lower perceived value than men, and how that sort of encourages a culture of impunity when we look at these crimes that are taking place?
Anand, I think this is very much ingrained in our society, right from, the moment a girl child is born. From a very young age, we are taught to serve, we are taught to serve the father, the brother. Later on, when we get married, our husbands. Yes, the society has changed. Women are getting more and more educated. They are entering the workforce. They're becoming financially independent. However, what is not happening is, again, the change in this patriarchal mindset where we still look at women as the main person who takes care of the home, the main person who is in charge of childcare. And so, we're not having any intergenerational dialogues around consent, around respecting women. We are still, like I said, we are viewing women as second-class citizens. So yes, they are working, they are earning, but that comes, as a second option after taking care of their family responsibilities. There is no concept of sex education still in our country, right? When we are not talking about something as core as sex, where are the generations going? They're watching porn, they're getting ideas of what sex should be through porn, which is very, very skewed and far away from reality. We don't have any conversations around consent. When we face child sexual abuse within our families, we often brush it under the carpet. We don't talk about these issues. So I think we really need, as individuals, as a society, we really need to rethink what is our role, our responsibility in how we are raising our men and boys, in the kind of respect, gender equality that we are providing, starting right from our homes. I think that is a big missing link in why we are unable to tackle rape culture. You know, we can sit here and blame the government, blame the institution, blame the judicial system, but I think what we are really missing is our own role as a society when we are constantly perpetuating, you know, these patriarchal notions, when we are advocating for misogynistic views and not addressing that as a root cause of this problem. So I think that that's where there is a missing gap. There's a gap in why we are not able to address this issue.
Right, Noopur, as we just heard, you know, women have made vast progress in India. It is a changing society, a rapidly changing society. People now have access to higher education. It's a highly educated society as well. It's a growing middle class. It's expected to be one of the biggest economies in the world. Women have have contributed a great deal to what we're seeing in India in terms of progress right now. But why has that not been matched by changes in what Shruti talked about a moment ago, and that is the patriarchal nature of society?
And part of the reason is, again, what I said when you asked me the first question. I also want to say that, you know, what the earlier panelists said about, you know, pinning this on a religious sort of identity, that I think is highly problematic. To sort of suggest that there is a certain religious identity in India that commits more sexual violence on others. So that really is problematic. And then talking about things like economic empowerment and ground realities, well, the fact of the matter is that we are looking at this particular case that's happened in Kolkata as a whodunit. The ground reality actually is that most rape cases that happened are not like this one. They are not like the one that happened in 2012. That doesn't mean that violent rapes do not happen, but there are two things. One is that a majority of violent rapes that happen with a very high frequency are actually committed against Dalit women in India, so oppressed caste women in India. And the other ground reality, if we are going to be talking about ground realities, is that the most common form of rape in India is not stranger rape. It is what we call acquaintance rape. So actually acquaintance rape is the most common form of rape in the entire world. And in India, if I'm not mistaken, it's 93% of cases are actually committed by people that are known to the victim. So the danger is there are no safe spaces for women. The hospital is not a safe space for women. The bedroom in one's home is not a safe space for women. So there's intimate partner violence around the world for women, including in India. There is a certain level of sexual violence and harassment that happens in the street that's more visible in India perhaps than in some other parts of the world. But, you know, we have to actually really understand that talking about a violent rape, a sensational sort of opportunity which is being exploited right now, the panic is being exploited by the Indian media. So this is a massive spectacle, and this is what happens all the time. So whenever there is a rape that ends in mutilation or suicide or murder, there is a certain amount of voyeurism in these cases. There's also, of course, outrage, but this outrage is selective, because such violent rapes actually happen all the time in terms of caste rape. But there are no protests that happen then. There are no, large groups of women who form, special movements around that. There is already a very strong existing movement on the ground led by Dalit women who are at the forefront of this, who are facing the brunt of this violence. So when we talk only about certain kinds of rapes that are very sensational, we are actually downplaying the prevalence of rape. and the common types of rape. So I think that is extremely important to understand. And one more thing that I want to add is that a panelist just said that they were in favor of death penalty. Firstly, it is proven that around the world, death penalty is not something that works as a deterrent. So that is a fact.
Yeah.
And also death penalty is something that disproportionately targets the marginalized. So it's actually serving the dominant caste and the dominant class in India, if we are going to go there. And then it's also a violent retributive justice. And I'll say this again, that the state becomes the avenger. This is not a solution.
Yeah.
You know? And these are things that are the ground reality. So the patriarchal norms that are present, that Shruti just mentioned, that is indeed a reality. But I think the reason why these protests and these discussions are not fruitful is that we are not looking at the fact that rape culture exists everywhere, not just in certain communities. And also one last thing I'd like to insist on is that if we talk about rape in these terms, we're actually letting off the rapists who are among us. They are in our workplaces, they are in our homes, they are in our communities, they are everywhere.
Tushar, I've just got a couple of minutes left, but I want to address one other aspect of the issue that we're talking about right now, and it's the political aspect of it. There is a news website in India called The Print, and it published a story about the politicization of the latest rape. It said that the BJP party blames the TMC party, which controls West Bengal, which is where Kolkata is situated. But the article says the politicizing of rape is not a bad thing, because it might lead to accountability and politicians actually doing something to stop crimes like this. What is your view on that?
That is precisely why, Anand, I told you that story about the civic volunteer and the National Human Rights Commission report that was published after the post-poll violence of 21. That's the very reason. That is also when the TMC government took over the state, continuing its 10-year rule. And that is when that very same report was discarded. So there is a need for political accountability. I also don't see it as a patriarchal issue because the women chief minister in Bengal, supported by her female MPs from the Rajya Sabha, Lok Sabha, and even the state assemblies, the MLAs that is, they all were marching in Bengal, sort of saying that the entire case was being turned into a political slugfest. I don't understand how even today we can say it's something to do with patriarchy when we've seen women leaders, political leaders, who certainly should be the voice of the entire female population, sort of taking a very convenient political stand on the issue. Also, we need to understand, I heard the previous speaker, and I again humbly disagree when she says that death penalty would be sort of unfair to the marginalized. Are we really assuming that the marginalized are the ones who commit these crimes? Because the alleged culprit in the West Bengal case, he's a civic volunteer, he is a man who draws a salary, he is a man who comes from the economically better sections of the society. So I don't think we can really reach these assumptions here. But again, Anand, the problem here is that of political will. As long as we keep applying political filters on such cases, and this entire mainstream media slugfest that you're seeing right now is because of the political bickering. Had there been the common agenda of justice for the one who had been, sort of murdered in that hospital that night, there wouldn't be this mainstream circus that is going on right now. But because the agenda of the state government and the people at large, especially the doctors of that hospital, is very, very different, that is why you're seeing these headlines.
Okay, and that is where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.